Well, if it's a Wednesday, you know what that means. We put a spotlight on ourselves here on the newsroom. As the media, we get to ask ourselves tough questions and then better ways of telling and bringing stories to your newsroom or to your living room. So this morning, we just want to highlight the issue of media ethics. And my panel this morning, allow me to introduce it today. Closer to me, I have Eric Odwor. He's the Secretary General of the Kenya Union of Journalists. On my far end, I have Dr. Nancy Booker. She is a lecturer at the Aga Khan University. It's always a pleasure to have both of you here this morning.
Thank you.
We're taking a look at media ethics. Let's begin perhaps, and I'll start with you, Dr. Booker, with a general overview of how you would grade us, and I mean as the media here in Kenya, when it comes to media ethics. What would you give us out of a 10?
I think I would have to defend the grade that I give. So
yes.
let me start by giving a defense. I think the media in this country has, to a large extent, remained very ethical. There are very many instances where, the push to be the first one to tell a story vis-a-vis being ethical has always been weighed, and the media has been very key in ensuring that they remain ethical. But what has happened over the last couple of months is that there's been with the disruptions that are taking place as a result of technology, there's a push to want to get audiences.
Right.
There's a push to have a lot of content that looks as if it's very, very tabloid in nature, and that in itself then leads to some unprofessional or unethical practices within media. So that you find, people invade, or journalists sometimes invade into people's privacy, misrepresent, provide information that's not accurate or credible. But those instances are few and far between. In general, I think the media has largely been ethical, and the Media Council has been at the forefront of ensuring that, one, that they circulate the code of conduct for the practice of journalists in this country. I think very recently they even made it into a very small booklet so that, one has no excuse of not having it. But training institutions have also been at the forefront of ensuring that that's where journalism training starts, or should start. Whether we are all doing it, that's a question for another day. But I think largely we have been ethical. And that means that, on a scale of 1 to 10, therefore, I would grade the media anywhere between 7 and 8. 7 and 8. Yeah.
Eric, your thoughts? Do you agree?
Yes, I agree that, let me say that professional journalists are largely ethical, and they subscribe to a code of conduct for practice of journalism in this country. The problem actually arises from non-journalists actually who are working in the media, and these are the people now who do not observe code of conduct for the practice of journalism in this country for the purposes of drawing audience to their shows. And that is where the problem actually arises. But for the professional journalists who are working as journalists in the industry, they are largely ethical. They observe and live up to the expectations of the code of conduct for practice of journalism in this country. So I agree with Dr.
So you'd
Buga
give the same, a 7 and an 8?
Yes.
Okay. Now, the reason why I think it's very important we take a look at media ethics is we've been seeing what's been happening not only locally but also in the international front with the leaking of phone calls. We saw what's been happening with White House, with Omarosa leaking that phone call between her and a few of the White House officials. Back here in Kenya, Sonko did it with this conversation with Waititu. It's not even sometimes the fact that it was leaked, it's the content within those conversations. Dr. Booker, what would you have to say about that when now we as the newsroom, we as the journalists, take this information? Yes, we are not the ones who leaked it ourselves, but we take this information and turn it into perhaps a newsworthy item due to the content that is involved inside it. Is that ethical?
I think it's questions about whether that information is accurate.
Right.
And if it's accurate and it's in public interest, then yes, then you'd have to make that call. And let me just say that oftentimes what happens in newsrooms, or what should happen, is that when you're faced with some of those decisions or stories where you have to make some of those ethical decisions, there is a team that actually meets and makes those decisions. It's not an individual journalist who decides I'm going to run with this, because at the end of the day, if for any reason that information is contested, it's the media house that then has to bear the brunt. So some of those decisions are weighed, is it in public interest? And if it is, then issues about the greater good for the majority of people would carry the day, hence the publication. But what this points to is, and we are continuously seeing that happening, is a need for us as a society to understand media literacy. We are seeing a lot of that happening, and the two cases that you've pointed out are because they are in the media and in the global space. But a lot of that happens even within social media networks, where I'm having a conversation with Eric and I go ahead and publish that information without telling him that what I was actually doing was recording this information and I was going to use it in future. I think that points to a need for society to be sensitive and to understand certain aspects of media literacy, because whereas we have the power, and everybody now has the power to share information and to create content, it also comes with certain responsibilities, so that you're very skeptical about every setup that you're in. Your photos are being taken and they're being shared out of context, because it's important for us to understand what's the context within which these conversations are taking place, rather than just removing excerpts of it and sharing it.
Eric, do you agree, especially with the aspect of where we use this content to enrich our stories?
Yes, I think there are two issues here. Number one, information that has been leaked, actually that's where the media thrives in, because we rely on documents that are actually leaked to us, rely on sources giving us tip-off of what is happening so that we can follow up. We rely on sources to give us inside stories of what happened in a meeting. So I think getting that information out there, I think there is no problem with that, because actually that's what journalism is all about. However, using an ethical means to get the information, I think that's where now the debate has always been. We've seen in the UK, actually, the paper that had to fold up because they were accused of using an ethical means to get information. So what should arise is the content analysis. We need to do content analysis when this information is leaked to you. Then you need to do content analysis and see how you're going to use it, because it's all about how you're going to treat that information.
And how can we as journalists, Eric, do that, the content analysis? Because a lot of the, like you said, a lot of the tips that we get here in the newsroom is from outside sources.
Yes.
And sometimes they're very much credible and sometimes they're not, because in this day and age of technology, I can manipulate a tweet, I can manipulate a photo with Photoshop, I can manipulate audio, right? So how then do we as journalists know, even though this has been leaked and this has come from a source, how do I know that it's credible enough before I can even take it to my editor and say, listen, this is what I have and I think this is important?
Yes, that is why a journalist is supposed to verify information that you get. If you get information, you need to verify that. You need to check with other sources, need to check with other people, so that you get different views, different angles to that story, so that by the time you are presenting this story to your editor, you already done your own verification. But then an editor also is not just supposed to be a forwarding editor. Your editor also is supposed also to interrogate that information, just to be sure that this information is accurate and actually is true, because that what will give the media credibility. But if you just get information and you run away with it and you go ahead and publicize that information without verifying, without calling other people to make sure that this information is accurate, then you are failing as a professional journalist.
Okay. Okay, Dr. Booker, you also agree on that aspect as well?
Yes, I do, and that's what separates media from everybody else out there who's sending and receiving information. That your first responsibility is to be able to fact check and verify the information that you're receiving, make contact, establish that information is true and it's verifiable, because society is very forgiving of everybody else out there who publishes information that they haven't verified, but they're not forgiving of media, because it's our responsibility to ensure that what we're presenting to people out there is accurate.
Okay.
You see, in one of the defamation cases, and actually the judge ruled that when you are given this information, you are trusted that you are a professional with the capacity to verify if that information is true or it's not. And therefore the media or journalists have got no excuse to use information that has not been verified. You need to verify it because that is your training. You've been trained on how to verify information, and therefore you shouldn't have any excuse of going with a story that has not been verified, because again, we have people out there who want also to influence in opinion out there using the media, and they'll give you information that is misleading. So it's upon you as a professional. That's why people are trained to ensure that you've got the ability and the capacity to verify and fact check, so that when you are giving the information out there to the public, it's information that is accurate.
All right. Dr. Booker, one question I would have perhaps, as even I'm looking at this report by the Media Council of Kenya, the watershed moment, and something that a lot of agencies such as KFCB have really pushed for, be it from adverts even to the news and the sort of the stories we put on air. Is it working?
Yes and no. Yes and no, because we've seen, and there's been evidence of, content, even children's programming.
Right.
For example, cartoons. You sit down and you see it's an animated series, you think it's innocent, and, you can let the children watch it. But if you go in depth and, sit down and actually watch that cartoon yourself, you'll realize that, a lot of cartoons have, sexually explicit content, and yet these are airing, for children. So I think it's important that we just don't take into account, the genres of programming and assume that, if it's been rated, then we go by that rating.
Right.
If it's a children's program, we let it air like that. I think there's need for us to be able to check, even before we air some of those programs, whether or not they actually meet those requirements.
Even be it those cartoons that are within the watershed period.
Yes.
All right. What if I have a news item, right? E.g., perhaps I'm doing a story like this one on the Standard newspaper, a 12-year-old girl who was defiled and killed 10 days after testifying. If I'm doing a story that perhaps puts light on a sexual assault, and it's a very powerful story, and it falls between 9 to 10 p.m. within that aspect, is that still okay?
The questions of language. And how you frame the story and the tone are extremely important in how you tell that story.
Eric, you can jump onto that as well.
Yeah, yes, it sometimes is all about the tone and how you present that. Then number two, you also, if that's the case, again, you also need to warn and caution your viewers or your audience that this is what I'm likely to show you, but please, viewer, beware. So those are some of the things that actually journalists are supposed to put in place to ensure that when you are giving this information out there, before you give that information, as I talked about content analysis, what is likely to be the impact of this. So you need also to warn and caution your viewers or the audience.
All right, let me bring it a bit closer home. This is by the Media Council of Kenya. Of course, it's something that is already in the public when they slapped Mr. Jeff Koinange with a notice of complaint for unethical behavior concerning one of the shows that was aired. It goes on to say, and I quote, Mr. Jeff Koinange hosted the call to Secretary General Francis Atwoli, where they discussed issues ranging from Atwoli's family and the political happenings in the country. It goes on to say that the interview kicked off at around 9:49 p.m., where Jeff started asking Francis Atwoli to clear the air about his marriage with a TV anchor. Dr. Booker, are personal stories, are personal details about someone's life, should I say, newsworthy? Should we make them newsworthy, or is that something that we perhaps have done wrong as journalists? And I don't mean something you'd probably find on BuzzFeed talking about Angela Jolie. No. I'm talking about here within locally, as we've seen it happen with this specific example.
When one is a public figure, sometimes drawing the line between what's private and what's public is very blurred. That line is very blurry because you've presented yourself in the public space, and so that balance of what concerning you is private and what's public then is weighed. But I think in this particular instance there was a very deliberate attempt to intrude into an individual's personal and private life, so that the questioning, he could still have asked about the marriage
in a different way.
In a different way, ask whether you're actually married to this particular person and leave it at that. You know, but I think there was a lot more in terms of intruding into you know, issues about their sexuality and their personal life, which was, I mean, embarrassing to say the least. And you can tell that you know, Atoli was very uncomfortable with the questioning.
And we were saying by the time you're making Atoli uncomfortable.
Yes, you know, and he actually calls it out and says, you know, this is not a conversation for us to have now because I have children, you know, grandchildren watching. You know, so what does that do? As a host of a TV program, you're the one who's supposed to drive the direction of a show. But when your guests even know better, then, you know, it calls for a lot of soul searching and asking yourself, am I actually doing the right thing? In a different context outside of media space, when the two of them are sitting down and having a conversation, they can have that conversation. Now, there are those who've argued that, you know, that line of questioning actually drew audiences to the show, you know, and yes, it did. But I don't think that, you know, media should be unethical even as it pushes to have people to watch its content.
Right. So it's the question of audience getting numbers versus being ethical.
Yes.
And at the end of the day, media newsrooms are media houses and they're in business and to make profit. So then what would you say to that when you have audience versus the question of ethics?
I think if we start thinking about, you know, the audience is at the expense of everything else that we are doing, then there's no difference between us and anybody out there in the
Is it not
streets.
sad to say that as well as perhaps the audience are also waiting for that specific question?
But the audience was also extremely uncomfortable. I mean, if you follow the tweets and you follow the conversations that were taking place online, that audience out there is also literate. And you do not want to assume that they don't know what they're looking for. Part of what could have kept them watching was, you know, what kind of questioning is that? You know, that in itself is something that would keep people watching and asking, wait a minute, where is this conversation going? And they called it out on Twitter, they called it out on social media spaces and said, you know, that line of questioning was inappropriate.
All right, Eric, your whole thoughts on this specific conversation between Jeff Koinange and Francis Atoli?
You see, you need to look at this thing also differently because there are two people here, and I know Francis is a public figure, he's an elected leader who is representing workers. As an individual, maybe you'll say that there's a thin line between his privacy and his life as a leader. But also look beyond that. There's a lady who is involved here, who is not a public leader, is not a leader who is elected. Then beyond that, there's other members of the extended family or where they are all involved. So when you take that line of questioning, basically you are also intruding to the privacy of other people who are also involved in this. And we expected, and if you look at that interview very well, when Francis was very uncomfortable with that line of questioning, if Jeff wanted to have that discussion, he could have even asked him, are you comfortable? Because I've seen that in other interviews where we participated in, where you are asked that in our show we are going to discuss ABCD. Are you comfortable if we discuss this? So I'm sure in that, when Francis was being prepared for the interview, had he been told that there is this very sensitive topic where I want us to discuss, are you comfortable with it? I'm sure they should have discussed that.
Is the issue the fact that they talked about his personal life or how he framed the question of his dating life?
Yes. Talking how he framed the question,
yes, it's
and also and the persistence he had when Francis was trying to avoid that, and even telling Jeff that, look, I have children who are watching this show, and he was very conscious, by the way. He was telling Jeff, look, I have children who are watching this show. So that means that Francis himself was not comfortable with that line of questioning. So Jeff should have realized that when he's on air, that by the way, this leader or this my guest actually is not comfortable with what we are discussing. Then go to the next question.
So my question would be then, Eric, is it okay for us as journalists, for us as media practitioners, to disclose one's personal information, e.g. their dating life, all right? And the reason why I ask this is not for everyone, it's for these public figures. One, everyone is always interested with their own personal, with a person who is in the public, their behind the scene lives. And you know, there's this saying, there's this an analogy that as long as you're in the public eye, now you belong to the public. Exactly. Everyone wants to know, what is Dr. Booker wearing, who is she dating, and all that. So there's that analogy, as long as you're in the public eye, you lost your sense of privacy and your right to privacy a long time ago. So then should we then as media practitioners be looking to disclose certain information of one's life and how we go about it then?
You see, what I'm saying is that, look here, the other parties were involved here. And when you are asking some specific questions, it means that you are also intruding to the privacy of other people who are not
Involved,
public figures.
right.
Exactly. So that is why it was important. It was important for Jeff to refrain, to confine himself within issues that concern Francis as an individual, not going deep into issues that actually also issues that also touch on other people who are not public figures. That's what I'm saying. Yes.
I would like to hear your thoughts before I come to Dr. Booker, your thoughts on the aspect of audience ratings vis-a-vis ethical content.
You see, the media cannot thrive on using unethical means to draw audience. Because what it means that you are killing the profession, you are killing the credibility that the industry is supposed to command. So the credibility is very important in the media. And if once you stray and start using an ethical and an orthodox means to draw audiences to your radio show or your TV show or to sell a newspaper, when you know very well that actually that is not right, then you can't go on forever with that. You lose credibility, and these audiences will always expect you to be using unethical means again, because if you're looking for the numbers, if you are using unethical means to draw the numbers, it means that we're also using that to draw the numbers. So it means that you'll be running away from the professional line to becoming to propaganda, and also to just to spread the falsehood and rumors.
All right, Dr. Booker.
I think one, just to pick up from what Eric has said, is that whereas using some of those very unprofessional and ethical ways of reporting and drawing audiences to your station or to your show would work for a while, it's just a matter of time before the same audiences call you out and stop watching or stop paying attention to your content. So we need to ask ourselves, why are we in this profession? And if it's a profession, then it is guided by a certain code that we have to abide by. That said, and going back to the whole Jeff Atwoli interview, Jeff could have, there were questions about his marriage. And, he just needed to clarify whether, the two people, Atwoli and the lady in question, were married. And that was enough, But I think the push so that even in that instance, he has intruded into his private life, into his family. But that was important because there had been a lot of conversation on social media around that. So once you've clarified that, yes, we are married, end it there and move into the other line of questioning. Right. But I think there was a very deliberate attempt to intrude into, issues around, the sexual issues around the couple, which, was extremely unethical.
Way out of line.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, even if you look at the way he posed the question, it is as if Jeff had a contrary information, that Francis was not capable of doing some other duties. And that means that even Jeff himself, by the time he was going to that show, it's like he had preconceived ideas about the whole issue. So that makes it unethical when he goes back and keep insisting that Francis answers that kind of question. So it means that this is a person who had gone to the show with already preconceived idea about what is likely to happen.
Right, and Dr. Booker brings up a good point, Eric, when she talked about how as journalists we're guided by certain conduct, certain ethical ethics and codes. As perhaps the Kenya Union of Journalists, when you have stories like this, it reflects badly on the entire profession in itself. Are there any disciplinary actions that perhaps as also slapped on a journalist when certain things happen like this? As KUJ, where we say, okay, we're also reflecting ourselves, and perhaps this was not right, because he has already received a slap from the Media Council of Kenya.
You see, when such cases occur, and I think that actually is within the responsibility and the mandate of the Media Council. And I think there was, we had several consultations within the media industry, if this is acceptable, and everybody actually agreed that this was not acceptable, and actually it paints a very bad picture about professional and our conduct as journalists. And so that is now the work, and we insisted and we told the Media Council that actually it's you who has this mandate and you must take action against Jeff. So we are expecting that such cases, if they occur, the Media Council actually is supposed to swing into action just to ensure that action is taken against
All right, Dr. Booker, just to sort of close up this specific conversation on media ethics, I've got to ask, what if I'm an investigative reporter and I really, really need this audio or this screenshot of a text message between myself and person X who refuses to be interviewed? Nevertheless, they are a key proponent to my story, especially as an investigative reporter. This is evidence of whatever it is that is being discussed at topic. Is it okay to use the phone call conversation and use it in my story without the knowledge of the person on the other end who has really refused to give me an interview? But for the sake of my story, for the sake of this investigative report, I need this screenshot of our conversation. I need this audio. What do you think?
I think we even have examples, from this particular media house. I think when John Allen and Mohammed Ali were working here, they did a story that was highlighting how Kenyans are getting swindled with a car tracking system that wasn't working. And they disguised themselves as clients, got the system installed, whether or not it was, and then did an investigative piece around it. And there were issues around the recording of telephone conversations. The difference with investigative reporting is that you're weighing certain things against public interest, and you're not making these decisions as an individual. You're consulting with other colleagues, you're making determinations about what's the best approach and what's the best angle. And oftentimes the journalists, when they're reporting, they disclose, and they say that, we had to do this.
We reached out.
Yes, we reached out, we were not able to do that, and we recorded this telephone conversation. So, but even when they do that, like even in that particular case where John Allen and Mohammed did that, they, before the story went on air, they spoke to the company that was doing this and said, we have this recording. So with investigative stories, I think we have to appreciate the time and the depth that this story is taken. The fact that when some of those decisions are made, they are not made by an individual journalist. There is consultation, and all that is weighed against the public's right to know, which oftentimes carries a day.
All right, before we close off Newsroom today, I really have to ask, and we are a global village, and I'll start with you, Eric, perhaps. Do you think that as Kenyan media we have done justice in covering what's happening to Bobi Wine in Uganda, our neighboring country?
I think that is not, we've not done enough, and because we're expecting that we would see headlines, because what is happening in Uganda is unacceptable, especially even when journalists are also involved.
Yes.
Yeah, journalists, there has been some acts of violence and harassment against journalists in Uganda, and we haven't seen very big stories being done on that. So it means that actually we failed as the media in terms of showing solidarity with our colleagues in Uganda, and also just trying to highlight what if there are other international instruments and laws that are being broken by Uganda, in especially what is happening in there.
So perhaps as Kenyan media, we should also take it deeper with this story of Bobi Wine?
Yeah, because if it's happening in Uganda, why are we assuming that it can't happen in Kenya? I mean, so it's just happening just next door here. So Kenyan media actually failed in terms of highlighting what is happening in Uganda.
In Uganda, all right.
And part of it has been, and I don't know, I can't say that for sure, the lack of desks that actually report on, foreign desks, that pay attention to stories that, big stories, regional stories that, have implications on us as a country.
As a continent.
As a continent. But I like what Eric says, that, there's been a lot around journalists and, the issues that they have to grapple with as they cover that story in Uganda, issues about safety and security of the journalists back there, journalists being attacked. I think we want to ensure that we need to be able to speak and come out very strongly and condemn some of those things in the spaces that we have, because Uganda is not far removed from us. It's just across the street.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But one more thing that I wanted to say is that I think one is that we have to understand that as journalists, there's a code of conduct that we have to abide by. And one of the things that, and I was hoping that Victor would be here, is, challenge MCK to ensure that that code is embedded in curricula across universities and across training institutions, so that there is a very deliberate attempt to do that. There are many instances where, you know, journalists leave training institutions and they see the code for the first time when they get to the newsroom. That shouldn't happen.
Because you didn't hear it about it in university.
Yes.
Very true. All right, thank you so much, Dr.